As you can see, mass transit is a lot more than just moving people. It has to do with economic development. We're now going to hear about how transit influences economic development in Atlanta, Cleveland, Minneapolis. And to lead that discussion, we've got Jimmy Granbery from H.G. Hill Realty. He is a superstar, and he's got a star or a Superman on his chest maybe, but a target. They just made an announcement of a significant development in Brentwood, which is exciting. So Jimmy, come on up and let's get your panel started, and I'll let you introduce them and move us forward.
Well, good morning. How y'all doing this morning? I was listening to Jim and Joe talk, and I thought as we moved through with our Brentwood project, and Joe said he had 1,000 public meetings. I'm like, you're kidding me. You've got to be kidding. But that's what I thought too. That's right. Everybody's got, I'm not going to waste a lot of time on the panel bios. Everybody's got those in front of them. We got Brian Leary from Atlanta, Kate Little from Atlanta, Dick Pace from Cleveland, and Russell Lamb from Cleveland, and Michael Lander from Minneapolis. And so everybody's got the bios. I don't need to do a lot of talking. I noticed the topic of our panel today is developing real estate around transit, and when Michael asked me to do this a couple of months ago, I just was reflecting back in 1895 when our family started the retail grocery business. We had a philosophy that it was a very complicated business model, but we had a store everywhere the streetcar stopped. And it was, going home side, the bus stopped, the streetcar stopped, you got out, you bought your groceries, and you walked home. It was a very complicated model, and it served us well for a long time as people changed their mode of transportation, the horse and buggy. We had little tie-up racks on the side in our rural stores, and then the automobile came along, and we bought property to the side and to the rear for the automobile, for parking lots, and the whole transformation. Then the suburbia, the sprawl, and we got a little bigger with a little more parking lots, and there was less mass transit, and then along came the bypasses. We followed the bypasses, and on and on and on. And it's sort of funny now that you flip the tables, and now we're building these urban developments like a Harris Teeter by Vanderbilt, a Whole Foods. We got deck parking, we got bus stops, it's a complete different, just a complete turnaround. So it's really fun to sort of watch the transformation of. I'm fourth generation, and we were talking the other day, what will it be like for our kids, 100 years from now, and their kids, what will they, other than obviously the iPods and iPads and all the stuff that goes on with electronics and technology, but just, we're sort of right back where we started 115 years ago, and it's really sort of a novel approach, or redo for me to see sort of the transformation and how it happens. And as we tour around with our design team and we look at other developments and what other people are doing in other cities, and you admire how they do things, and it's location and access to mass transit, access to major highways, etc., and all the different ideas you pick up on, and you look at the ones that one that's always really stuck in my mind is in Dallas, right near SMU. It's called Mockingbird Station, and they took this, I think it was a GE plant, I'm not sure exactly. It was a big giant warehouse, and they converted it into loft apartments and added some retail around it, but then they had these really grand steps that went up, and they built a mass transit stop, and at the top of the steps was a movie theater. But here, whatever the Dallas MTA is called, they had the bus station right there, the transit, they had light rail, and so it was really, a way to attract those people in, and it was, to me, a very successful development around transit that sort of made it happen because they had all these loft apartments. And it was probably done 15 years ago, I think. So it's really neat to sort of see the whole cycle come around, and now here we are talking about the BRT. And Jim, we're supporting you in your efforts to get this done. We think it'll be great to connect East Nashville to West Nashville, and I love the think of the day that I can park at the St. Thomas park and ride station and ride the bus downtown and not pay $15 to park and be able to text and answer emails and read the paper, get back on the bus and ride home. And although I love my Tahoe, it's really a nice opportunity to get things done and around transit. So that's enough about me and whatever. And I'll just start, and we're going to ask each one of the panelists to talk a little bit about what they've done, and then we'll get into some Q&A and hopefully keep this thing rolling along. So, Brian, you want to start here?
Sure, absolutely. And, I'm going to let Kate talk a little specifically about some of the Atlanta stuff. Michael asked me to talk about emerging trends in transit-oriented development and smart growth or what have you. And, you know, I think we're at a reflection point in this country, and it's good to hear that you guys are leading in that regard. So there's a differentiation between a trend and a fad and a shift. And I firmly believe that we aren't in the midst of a change in fad, and that this trend that you're starting to see, you know, everything old is new again, is really more of a shift. And so it's happening within kind of a demographic context that I think we need to appreciate. So I'm going to try to walk us through some big things that are happening across the country. And I started to reflect, I'm part of Gen X, so we're the kind of the smallest generation. We're kind of getting squeezed in between you know, the baby boomers and the echo boomers and worried about Social Security and things like that. But I started to look at the influence of pop culture on our consumer choices, where we live, what do we drive, what do we buy, et cetera. And so when I was growing up, and I know probably a lot of folks in this room, a lot of the top shows, the highest Nielsen rated shows, were all suburban based, right? Suburban Cleveland, suburban Long Island, Happy Days, even suburban Milwaukee. And you know, even The Simpsons are in suburban Springfield, wherever that is, right? In fact, when an alien decided to visit the United States, Alf ended up in the burbs, right? So even, right, Leave It to Beaver, there was this kind of bucolic picture of the American dream, white picket fence, big car, garage, things like that. And that influenced kind of our decisions about where to locate, how to be an American, right? So what's interesting what's happened in the last, say, decade to almost 20 years. Through Friends and Seinfeld, you know, Friends introduced us to living in the loft above the coffee shop, where your friend with no musical talent could play her guitar every week or so. You know, remember the coffee mug that was the size of a cereal bowl? I mean, things like that came out of things like Friends and Frasier and Seinfeld. And in fact, you know, it's Sex in the City, not Sex in the Suburbs. Now, Desperate Housewives did make a comeback in that category. But if you look at all of those shows that are really the hottest shows on television over the last 10 years or so, in general, they're more urban-based. Now, the American dream, making it, having a career, is in a city. It's going out, it's hearing live music, it's walking places, it's riding the train. And I think that's going to have an impact. Now, so who's growing up within this pop culture? What group is being influenced with kind of an urban American message? It's a pretty big group. So we've heard about the baby boomers and the way they kind of move through the economy. They kind of move through the economy kind of like, it's kind of a bad metaphor, but like a rat through a snake, right? So when they were little, you know, in the best possible way, right? Circle of life kind of way. So when they were little, right, Johnson & Johnson, Gerber's, you know, all of those brands that kind of went to all of these new kids did really well, right? And then they moved through buying their first automobiles and suburban homes. And so now it's, you know, it's a different set of choices they're making, healthcare and retirement and things like that. So we're here in October, the end of October. So in 1956, there were about, you know, 41 million trick-or-treaters, baby boomers on the streets of America. A lot of people don't realize that actually right now we've got a bigger group hitting the streets. Those echo boomers, 41.5 million people. In fact, if you look at the numbers, under the age of 14, right now, under the age of 14, it's a much bigger number, there's 61 million Americans. Okay, so I went ahead and, you know, kind of handicapped my number here for the trick-or-treaters. Figured that if you're under the age of 4 or 5, you're probably not trick-or-treating. But that's going to have a huge impact on this economy, right? So that rat through the snake is a lot bigger now in the history, and they're going to be influenced by urban trends. So it's, again, I think this is a shift, not necessarily a fad or a decade-long trend. Now, those of you near the screens, hopefully you can read this. This is actually from The Economist. And I was actually sitting next to a guy today in the plane. This is a guy who had started a number of companies, actually went public with some, and I told him about what I was talking about today and some of the trends that are going on. The slide on the right, or the graph on the right, shows the percentage of those people going for their driver's license. It's at the lowest point ever for people at the age 16, and it's been since we've recorded this in the United States. And the guy and I were talking, I remembered the minute that driver's license office opened, when I was 16, I got my driver's license. And here in the United States, we're at the lowest rate of 16-year-olds going to get their driver's license. And he said, oh my God, you're exactly right. My son, I was ready to take him down there the day of, and he said, oh, Dad, I've got, things to do. We'll get to it. 8 months later, they finally got it. And you can start to see some of these trends here in terms of we're driving less, and this gigantic generation is making decisions differently about what they value. And if you're not going to get your driver's license, right, you're going to, and mobility is a key to having a job and quality of life, where are they going to go, and what kind of places are they going to choose to be? And so again, I don't know if you can read this here, but we're becoming an urban place, not only here in the United States, but this is across the world. Right now in 2010, 77% of the world's population is in an urban place. And urban is Brentwood, by the way, in Franklin, if you're wondering. That would be qualified across this planet as urban. By the year 2050, 86% of all of us will be in places like that. Right now, 90% of the world's GDP already occurs in those types of places, metropolitan places. So they're not going anywhere. And as you talked about adding another 1 million people over the next, say, 20 years, Atlanta is dealing with looking at adding another 3 million people. That's basically every man, woman, and child vacating Denver and moving there. And you cannot build your roads fast enough, wide enough. That Katy freeway can't be big enough to keep congestion off of it, as the picture showed. So pretty amazing trends that are going on. So how has development responded? Well, we know what development kind of responded to that post-war development pattern, right? Arterials, cul-de-sacs, et cetera. This is old now, but this was an article that the National Geographic actually did on this issue. And this isn't in Nashville, and this isn't in Atlanta, but we can sort of relate, particularly in Atlanta. Here's Maryland, who's long since dead, gracing the billboard of the mansionettes. Now, those that are kind of in this business, I know Michael and I have been on panels before, mansionettes is a pejorative term, typically, right? It's, a house too big for its lots, stuck next to its neighbor. But here it is, it's a superlative. They're selling the mansionettes, and within basically 5 years, the area looked like this. I mean, this is out west in Vegas. And when I speak around the country to colleges, I ask, those students in the room, how many of you would want to move into a place like that? I'll get the one hand who's a bit of the joker in the class, but no one wants to move into a place like that. And so people are now realizing they can actually make a choice. And you can see we haven't delivered the highest quality of architecture and development in places like this. It's throwaway. It's recyclable. I mean, but for stucco in Europe and in Charleston and places like that, and it goes up pretty quick, it can also come down pretty quick. And we're seeing that as well. But there's a trend to come back to quality, to come back in town. I mean, look at Charleston, South Carolina. And what you discover in places like this, or in downtown Nashville, is you discover this. You discover window shopping. Who knew I needed a hand-painted thermos until I walked by it, right? You don't see this driving by at 35 miles an hour. So these places are recovering and they're thriving. I mean, New York. New York's a bit of an anomaly. But look at Washington, D.C. The rents that Georgetown is getting on its retail space are approaching $100 a square foot. 20 years ago, they had the kite shop and the t-shirt shop and places like that. This is happening across the country. Atlanta, the city of Atlanta today in 2012 has more people living in its city limits than ever in her history. And that's significant because from 1946 to 1996, that city population declined every single year. Right? It's caught it all back up, basically over that short period of time. So some real quick, stories about Atlanta. At one point, not now, because today in 2012, the region, which is 5.5 million people, right, which covers over 8,000 square miles, size of New Jersey, right? Today, the region has less jobs than it did in 2001. Okay? we have a problem, and I'm not going to get into it in the weeds here necessarily until you ask questions. We have a fundamental problem in the region about economic sustainability. I'll come to that in a second. But while in our go-go days, we were consuming about 100 acres a day for development. 100 acres a day of field, farmland, and forest made Atlanta, in Chris Lineberger's words, a Brookings Fellow, the fastest growing civilization in the history of the planet. Our core region is 110 miles north or south. You can fit the entire state of Delaware there. Right? Atlanta's a very booster, pat ourselves in the back kind of town. We started to stop celebrating things like this, right? Because it's not sustainable. It affects air quality. I mean, I was talking to the guy next to me who lives in his own bubble in an area called Johns Creek. He's like, oh my God, I had no idea. What happened to Atlanta? I said, well, you open a paper anywhere across the country, typically it's a negative headline. Right? We drive, because we're so far spread out, 110 million miles a day as a region. It's probably gone up. My dad is old. I didn't even know how much 110 million was in terms of distance. It's enough to go from the earth to the sun, turn around, and start coming back. Every day we do it. I mean, the average commute in Atlanta is 59 minutes, 60 minutes. Okay? That's not sustainable. In fact, there's a lot of good studies out there right now. There's something called the Marchetti's constant, which basically is at 30 minutes in your commute, kind of one way, after 30 minutes you get a huge decline in economic productivity and value and selection. So real quickly, Atlanta is actually kind of a tale of two cities. We're the grasshopper who didn't prepare for the winter. We're kind of the guy the athlete who stopped training, who used to be able to show up and beat everyone, but has spent too many, early mornings at the Waffle House as a region. But the city has never been better, right? Even though it's going through its own changes. So the Atlanta BeltLine is a very simple idea. It's connecting 4 historic freight rail lines that were developed by the private sector 100 years ago to respond to a problem. 100 years ago, downtown Atlanta had 2 railroad stations, and there were 33 private railroads fighting to get into those stations. The congestion on the lines was a total pain. You couldn't get into downtown, so 4 separate rail lines built bypasses around downtown. Sewing them up together into a contiguous loop is the simple idea of the Atlanta BeltLine. You can see here in this axon where it actually exists. It's fully within the city, and those rail corridors went in before the neighborhoods were there. So they actually represent about 400 acres of a 22-mile loop, 70 to 200 feet wide, of existing infrastructure, of existing right-of-way, of existing opportunity in neighborhoods today that are known as Buckhead, Virginia Highland, Ansley Park, but also West End and Bankhead as well. So our most affluent and our most economically challenged neighborhoods as well. This is what it looked like just a few years ago. This is where people would turn their back to it. This became, the only people moving through here basically lived underneath the trees and things like that. You can see this building here with graffiti on it is actually full. It's a really successful building. On the far right of this building is one of Atlanta's top restaurants. It's called Two Urban Licks. On the far left of the building is where Robot Chicken and Cartoon Network and Adult Swim does a lot of their production. But they had nothing to do with their back. And so simply right now under construction, I actually should have some photos. This is what it's looking like right now. We've cleaned it up. It actually was a brownfield, cleaned it up, put in a 14-foot wide multi-use trail to connect these neighborhoods. There's over 40 neighborhoods along the Atlanta BeltLine. And what we've done is preserve rail corridor. So we preserve rail corridor along the line. If you were here yesterday, you heard Dave Williams from our Chamber of Commerce talk about the 1 penny sales tax that we had that we vociferously said we didn't want. We did not want to implement billions of dollars of improvements in transportation as a region. This train would be running within 3.5 years because we've secured the right-of-way, we've built the corridor out to accommodate it, and there's development going on right now. So what's interesting, and again, I apologize if you're not close enough to see this, is that we have TOD without the T right now in Atlanta. Because what developers are seeing, number one, the city of Atlanta's got its highest population it ever has. You're seeing that you can't add any more lanes to our freeway. So Katy Highway has 26 lanes. Atlanta's downtown connector, which I call the downtown disconnector, has 21 lanes right through the middle of town. And it starts filling up probably in about 3 or 4 hours. About 3 o'clock on a Friday, it becomes a parking lot. And it's getting earlier and earlier and going later and later. And you can't widen it. And so this is one section of town. This is over on the east side. The pink line represents the Atlanta BeltLine corridor, which today just opened about 2 weeks ago, a new multi-use trail, a bike trail. So it's really bike trail-oriented development because you're now connecting neighborhoods in a way that weren't connected before. And these neighborhoods you can get by faster on your foot or on your bike than you can by car. It takes 30 minutes to kind of go from the top of the screen to the bottom. It takes 6 minutes on a bike. And you're seeing all those pink dots are new multifamily developments. There's 1,000 residential units that are actually going through development process right now. There's another 1,000 that have been built since this actually got announced. That's not insignificant. It's actually happening. And so just to give you, to kind of finish it up, to kind of hand it over to the next folks, this is what it looked like a few years ago. I'm sure that there's a latent infrastructure here in Nashville that could provide a connection. I mean, you're actually using it, your Broadway corridor is kind of latent infrastructure that you're going to get a lot more out of. Because a lot of people don't realize that out of one lane of freeway, over an hour you can carry about 2,500 people in a car. If you put them in a bus, you double that to about 5,000. If you put them in a train, you can carry 50,000. And so it's about efficiency and moving people and maintaining mobility. And so this is what it looks like today. And again, I need to replace this with a photo. Within the same corridor, 7,200 feet wide, you can fit a lot. As you start adding the development interface, again, upzoning. We went through a 16,000 acre upzoning master planning process that will go through the zoning process hopefully in the next year. And then you can see how the trains work in too. So very simple. So you can see here Atlanta is in Nashville. We're almost one combined metropolitan area. They actually call it Chatlanta now, or Atlanta-Nuga. So maybe it'll be Nashlanta will be the next connection, because regions actually, I mean, this is how the world operates now. You really don't see the state lines. And mega regions are the future, and there's so many great things going on in Nashville. I was here with ULI and Rose and Hunter Gee about a month ago. What you guys have that we don't have is you know who you are, right? We know who we aren't, and that's a problem. We haven't given anyone a reason to invest their heart in Atlanta since 1991 when we were awarded the Olympics. And that's why we're kind of drifting right now. And we're going to start spending more time in Nashville figuring out how you guys are doing. So I'm going to keep moving. I only have 10 or 12 minutes, I think, so I probably used it all up. And I'm guessing, Kate, are you next?
Yes.
All right, so that's it for me. Kate, you come up.
Okay, good morning. My name is Kate Little, and I need to do a disclaimer first. Brian actually worked for Atlanta BeltLine, Inc. I serve on the BeltLine Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and for some reason, I was telling some of the other panelists last night, and Brian, you might know this, the ABI staff doesn't seem to like to travel. So when Michael contacted the BeltLine, maybe James had something else going on this weekend, he asked me if I wanted to attend. So I actually work for a statewide association of nonprofit affordable housing developers, but I've served on the advisory board since its inception for the past 5 years, and I'm actually rolling off come the spring of 2013. So I'm happy to be here to share a little bit about the affordable housing side of transit-oriented development. So Brian has already talked about the BeltLine and put it in context, just so you'll see that the BeltLine loops around the city. It's within 2 to 3 miles of the downtown core of Atlanta, so it's within the perimeter. It's within 285. And I hope these statistics are up to date. 49% of the land is under control, and they've completed part of the environmental impact statement and are moving on to looking at the planning of the actual transportation. As Brian mentioned, a lot of the focus in the first few years has been on trail development, walking trails, and also bike trails. As part of the development of the BeltLine, and to talk about the community involvement, I think Joe also talked about the BeltLine area was divided into 10 sub-area master plans, and the BeltLine staff has continued to meet with the community over time to talk about not only the kind of transit it wanted, but also some of the economic development and residential development to come up with a comprehensive plan for the area. So in terms of housing and what the Atlanta BeltLine was looking at, and also in terms of what the BeltLine Affordable Housing Advisory Board, or BAHAB, took into consideration, there were several principles that outlined how the development should take place, and getting actually community input. So some of that had to do with actually equitable development and triple bottom line, so looking at the economy, looking at the environment, and actually looking at equity. One of the things the BeltLine actually has two advisory committees. One is BAHAB around housing, and there is also TADAC, and we call it in Atlanta, I'm not sure why, I think we might be one of the few areas in the country that talks about a tax allocation district as opposed to tax increment financing. But the City Council also created TADAC, the Tax Allocation District Advisory Committee, which is also very interested in equitable development. And so the BeltLine actually has developed an equitable development plan that's available on its website. So now in terms of affordable housing, one of the things that we looked at, well, first of all, how did the affordable housing piece come to being? There were nonprofit housing practitioners operating within the city of Atlanta. When the talk first started about the BeltLine, we knew that the BeltLine would impact several areas, several neighborhoods that Brian charitably called economically challenged. So there were actually some neighborhoods where disinvestment had taken place, especially in the southwest side of Atlanta. And so some of the community development corporations actually began to lobby City Council and the mayor's office to talk about the fact that along with the development of this transit, there should also be some physical revitalization of the neighborhoods, and that there also needed to be some concentration, some focus on development of affordable housing. So along with building market rate housing, there should be some inclusion of affordable housing so that existing residents in those neighborhoods would actually be able to benefit from the development of the BeltLine. And so the City Council actually did agree, and as part of the financing for the BeltLine said that 15% of each bond issuance would be dedicated to a housing trust fund, so that there was some money available that could be leveraged, that could actually be used to pay for the development of affordable housing. And a goal was set that over 25 years, and that's the build out for the BeltLine, especially 25 years because the referendum didn't pass. That could have shortened it tremendously. But the goal was for the development of 5,600 units of affordable housing over the 25-year period. And so the City Council, in setting up the trust fund, also set up this BeltLine Affordable Housing Advisory Board. So the BeltLine Affordable Housing Advisory Board, in looking at its charge and looking at its task in terms of what it was supposed to do, said that we needed to think about what the components, how should we exactly carry out our charge? What is affordable housing? What does it mean when we talk about building affordable housing? What kind of housing should it be? To whom should the housing be affordable? How do you sustain housing affordability over time? And then what might some of the programs look like? Shouldn't necessarily be all new construction. It shouldn't necessarily be all home ownership, but some kind of balance in terms of the type of housing. And so we looked at basically providing down payment assistance, providing development incentives, and also a key thing was actually property acquisition, acquiring some property in and around the BeltLine in order to produce the desired housing. So some of the principles involved had to some of the principles involved actually go back to some of the core principles that we were initially talking about in terms of facilitating housing. We didn't necessarily want a concentration of affordable housing. We wanted to see some mixed income development. So we talk about, mainstreaming children in school. We wanted disadvantaged, we wanted those mainstreamed into any new development that was going to be under construction. We did recognize the need for long-term affordability, so it wasn't just a question of the subsidy had to last. And so in terms of home ownership, what were some of the things we could build into the housing to make sure it was affordable long-term, not just for the first buyer of the property. So in addition to mixed income, we were also looking at, we wanted green housing and we wanted barrier-free housing. We wanted the housing to incorporate some of the visitability, some of the visibility concepts now being talked about, so it could be available to all regardless of a person's physical independence or dependence. And in terms of green housing, when you're talking about affordable housing, we wanted to make sure that lower income people could afford the utilities. Utilities are a very big thing, and one of the big things in Atlanta actually has to do now with not so much our heating and electricity, but basically our water and sewer. So utilities, in order to keep those prices down, we knew that would help in terms of affordability. So some of the recommendations that came out of BAHAB had to do with, again, a balance between rental and owner-occupied. We also wanted to make, because the TAD had to be supported by the city, by the county, and also by the school district, we wanted to also make sure that there was some preference for those residents, for City of Atlanta residents, and also for first responders and for school teachers, so that we could encourage them to actually move within the City of Atlanta and not necessarily have to contribute to sprawl and live outside of the City of Atlanta. So in terms of the rental housing, some of you may be familiar with the low-income housing tax credit program. One of the things we talked about was actually, in terms of the Housing Trust Fund, matching that subsidy to existing subsidies. So we knew about the availability of the Low-Income Housing Credit Program. There's also the Home Investment Program that is available through the Department of Housing and Urban Development and goes to local municipalities. So that was a source of funding that the City of Atlanta had available. Also the Community Development Block Grant Program. So we didn't want our program to have different income limits such that it made it harder for the development community to actually participate in terms of making affordable housing available along the BeltLine. So we use the 60% of area median income because that seems to be the standard now. And then in terms of home ownership, we recognize the need to target a higher income population, so we talked about 100% of area median income. So in terms of where the housing would be located, Brian mentioned a couple of the neighborhoods. Buckhead is our hoity-toity ritzy area. It doesn't necessarily have at this point a lot of affordable housing. And so what we want, when you're looking at the subsidy, recognizing that we have a limited amount of subsidy available, and it would cost more to actually try to develop housing in certain areas, we still said that that should be an aim of the program because, again, we want to deconcentrate affordable housing and have it available to all areas of the city, because one of the things that we're trying to do in making housing available is also promote housing choice and make housing available in neighborhoods of opportunity where jobs are available, where good schools are available, so that people could begin to rise above their zip code and not necessarily be limited long-term in their horizons. So we also realized that housing needed to be available in terms of market conditions. And so one of the things we said was that we needed to periodically review the criteria that we came up with to make sure that it was still appropriate in terms of what was going on in terms of the market. And then in terms of sustaining affordability, some of you I haven't really talked to that many people here who know that much about housing, so I don't know how many of you might be familiar with a community land trust, but that's actually where a nonprofit organization maintains ownership of the land, and actually the housing, the physical improvement is actually what's sold and separate from the land. So we talked about community land trusts so that affordable housing could be made available in terms of over the long term. Again, we want to spread the subsidy as far as possible, so it's not just the initial occupant who benefits, but long-term occupants also benefit. In terms of rental housing, we looked at a 15-year minimum affordability period, and again, that goes along with some of the other subsidies, programs that are available. The low-income housing tax credit, for the most part, is near 30 years, but under the home program, 15 years is probably the standard. This is one development that the Atlanta BeltLine actually decided. The Atlanta BeltLine actually works with the Development Authority, the Atlanta Development Authority, to make grants available under the Housing Trust Fund. Because of the market, because of the Great Recession, we haven't necessarily seen the amount of development. We also haven't been able to entice enough developers to actually, even with the Housing Trust Fund, to actually begin to develop the amount of affordable housing we'd like to see. This was an opportunity that presented itself to the Atlanta BeltLine to actually buy this project that was in default and turn it into and complete the development and then make a certain number of the units available for affordable housing. And actually 3 of the units, the Atlanta BeltLine actually worked with a local community land trust so that 3 of the units actually belong to the community land trust. And in order to make the affordable units available, the Atlanta BeltLine actually held a raffle and advertised the income limits. And one Saturday, toward the end of the last year, focused on, again, first responders, the Atlanta public schools, teachers, and actually held a raffle to identify purchasers for the units in this, what we're calling Triumph Loft. So in terms of the amount of money available, again, the 15% of the bond issuance is supposed to be available for the trust fund. There's actually only been one bond issuance, again, because of the market, the bond market. So the trust fund was capitalized with $8.8 million. And that has been, again, it was divided into several tranches. So it has produced 120 units and also 85 units through the down payment assistance program. So some lessons learned. Brian talked about data. We did not do this initially, but within the past 12 to 18 months, the Atlanta BeltLine and Bayhab have worked together developing, have contracted for an inventory to give us a better idea of the existing housing within the TAD and close and adjacent to the TAD, to determine the existing housing conditions, what's there in terms of subsidized housing, what's there in terms of affordable housing, to see if we needed to reorient our criteria. So one of the things that we would suggest, and it took us 3 or 4 years into the process to actually, because anecdotally you may feel you know what's in the community, but it's very good to actually have the numbers. Another thing that the numbers showed us, in addition to the housing conditions and the demographic information, also had to do with employment, and we found that there were actually more jobs around the BeltLine than we had initially thought. I mentioned the low-income housing tax credit program. The BeltLine funds, the BeltLine Housing Trust Fund, is made available as a grant, not necessarily as a loan. We thought that was very important because, again, there are limited resources available for the development of affordable housing. And generally, especially when you're going to higher income, higher market areas, you need all of the subsidy that you can identify. But you also have to work with the existing subsidies. And the low-income housing tax credit probably produces more multifamily rental housing than any other program has in the country, and so therefore we wanted to make sure that the Housing Trust Fund could mesh with that. But there's a problem that we didn't actually recognize until we had gotten into the process. The low-income housing tax credit actually has some rules in terms of what kind of other subsidies you can use with it. And there's actually a penalty for using bond proceeds with it. So those were some of the things that we had to become aware of, and then actually work with our state housing finance agency to figure out how to make the trust fund work with that tax credit program in order to produce multifamily rental housing. One of the other things that the BAHAB has been concerned about, but actually falls outside of our purview, but something that we still want to try to address, has to do with how do we mitigate displacement. There has been a lot of concern at the neighborhood level in terms of how existing residents actually benefit from the BeltLine if their taxes go up, if they're renting and they're thrown out. So we tried to come up with a few ideas, and we've continued to talk with City Council and the Mayor's office to figure out how to implement some of these ideas. Mandatory inclusionary zoning has not necessarily been a popular idea in Atlanta, but it's one that housing practitioners have still continued to try to promote. There's producing a community land trust. So one of the things, the BeltLine actually has a partner, the Atlanta BeltLine Partnership, which is responsible for actually raising money and has raised, I don't know, around $40 million to help with actually completing the BeltLine and providing financing for some of the things that the bond proceeds will not cover. The Atlanta BeltLine Partnership was instrumental in starting a citywide community land trust, and that community land trust is now working with other neighborhood groups to figure out how best to promote this idea, because it's new and people wonder, well, okay, I own the house and I don't own the land. How exactly does that work? So we do have an educational process that's necessary to go along with this. So there is an educational campaign involved. We've talked about doing some targeted property tax reform, and we've also talked about looking at just cause eviction control. Some of these things are not necessarily at the city level, but also would involve going through the General Assembly. The city of Atlanta is a blue island in a red state, and so some of these things we do have difficulty in convincing our state elected officials, I guess, of the need and of the efficiency, of the appropriateness of some of the ideas that we've suggested. So just factors to keep in mind when Nashville is looking at developing affordable housing as part of transit-oriented development. You do need a subsidy. The market rate units will not necessarily pay for the affordable housing units. And so a dedicated revenue source, such as a housing trust fund, through bond proceeds or sales tax would be very useful in terms of promoting affordable housing. So you need to determine the source of the subsidy, and again, if it's long-term, that really helps. You should also, I talked about the inventory, if at all possible, do some kind of inventory, do some kind of data analysis of what already exists so that you can build upon that and make a determination whether you want to promote rehabilitation, whether you want to promote new construction, whether adaptive reuse makes sense, whether you have enough home ownership, enough rental units, or you want some more for sale units. All of those things that the data can help you determine. And so again, we want to provide a diverse housing for lower income persons so that they can participate and enjoy choice neighborhoods and enjoy a better quality of life. In terms of contact information, I've taken the liberty, I'm here substituting for James Alexander, so I didn't even tell James this, but I've taken the liberty of providing his information if there's any follow-up in terms of what the Atlanta BeltLine is doing in terms of providing affordable housing. Thank you.
They've thrown a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions right now before you lose that train of thought and we can go on to the next speaker? Yeah, Jim?
Well, I was just curious. We all were sort of watching the tax initiative for the BeltLine project with great hope that it would be realized. And I was curious, why didn't it happen? Is it just money, or is there a sense in that community that public transportation isn't worth spending the money?
So and I don't know what Dave said yesterday about that, but when we got into this campaign, we realized, what's the first thing? Admitting you have a problem. So everyone admitted we had a problem. And then we knew we needed money to fix it. And everyone realized that we wouldn't have the ability with one fell swoop to come up with enough money. And the previous governor, gave us a weird chance to fix it. In the best example of kind of pushing down decision-making, they let a local roundtable of elected officials, the county chair and a mayor from each county, form a roundtable to select projects. And so everything seemed to be working well. And I was actually on the board of the educational component. And they said, hey, we predict this primary election, we have great historical information, there'll be about 350,000 people at the low end to 450,000 people at the high end who will actually vote. They gave us a weird off-presidential cycle primary. It was just local primary elections that gave us a chance to vote. Very small turnout, less than 15% historically. And if had that happened, it would have passed easily because 250,000, 300,000 people voted for it. What happened is 675,000 people came out to vote. And it became very polarized about kind of the Tea Party got involved, it became suburban versus in town. And fundamentally, it was a 1 penny sales tax that would only sit on the books for 10 years, which basically was useless from a bonding standpoint. Other places do this for 30 years. Denver, LA, things like that, places like that. So it was going to be a drop in the bucket for what we needed, but still $10 billion. And what happened, and I don't care whether it was good marketing or bad marketing, it was definitely things we could have done. But we tried to get people to buy into a region, and it was Atlanta. Transform, move Atlanta, untie Atlanta, whatever it was. And this is kind of what I said when I finished. 5.5 million people that live in that Atlanta region, and they only took the inner core, 10 counties. I mean, the MSA is a 30-county area. That 10-county area does not buy into that they're a resident of metropolitan Atlanta and what that means. They're residents of Cobb County, Gwinnett County, Douglas County. We actually had a politician, an elected official. I mean, if you guys understand kind of code words, this guy wasn't even talking in code. He said, he's Fayette County on the south side. He said, we don't want transit or the people who ride it anywhere near Fayette County. I mean, I couldn't believe he would. I mean, that's not even code as far as I can tell. That's pretty outright, racist in terms of things go. And the key was, in this case, is there wasn't one penny that was leaving Fayette County, number one, period. All the pennies that were being collected in Fayette County was going to stay there, and their whole project list were roads. So it didn't matter, but nonetheless, that's where it went. So I think there's a much bigger issue about why it failed, and we're going to continue to fail on things like that. We used to be able to compete on things like this. But I guarantee you, had we had the Olympics up for a vote this summer, it would have failed the same way. And so Atlanta's got a serious problem right now as a region about who it is and where it's going. And maybe the pain isn't high enough yet. The crisis isn't great enough yet to everyone. So I'm sorry to ramble on that.
That's all right. Anybody else got a question? We'll move on. Okay, thanks.
Well, my name's Dick Pace, and I appreciate the invitation to speak here. The only unfortunate thing is I have to follow Joe Calabrese and his great presentation, so hopefully I'll be able to expand on it. I'm a small-scale real estate developer and recovering architect. I sold my practice about 10 years ago to do real estate development, but I still love architecture. I wanted to invest in Cleveland, stay in Cleveland, and I'll tell you the story as a case study of just one project. So does investment in transit result in real estate development? That was a huge discussion as Joe was trying to get the political wheels in motion to get this funded and make this a reality. We had been talking about it in Cleveland since the 50s. I remember since the 70s. Joe was actually able to get it done. So the answer to that question is yes. If it's done right, transit will spur real estate economic development. This is a pretty good return on investment, $200 million or so. Joe can give you a better number on the investment in Euclid Avenue and the BRT. The result is over $5 billion of investment. So I think it's a great return and a great case study. But it has to be done right. So hopefully in question and answers we can get into some of the detail on that. This is a health tech corridor. Joe had a slide similar, but to the left is downtown. To the right is University Circle. Downtown has, at this point, probably about 100,000 people who work in offices downtown every day, about 11,000 people who live in downtown in the central business district. University Circle has probably about 60,000 people that work in that district every day, and its residential population is growing. The blue in between those two is what we call Midtown. I understand you have a Midtown as well. Midtown grew up and it's had a real change over the years. So going back just a brief history, this is a slide of the house that was on the project where I'll describe the project at East 71st Street and Euclid Avenue. If I had a pointer, you could see at the bottom right-hand corner, that's the prototype for the BRT. You can see it's a very green solution. It's powered by biofuels, and so Joe, hopefully that might be in the next prototype level. But this is Euclid Avenue, as Joe briefly mentioned. It started out as an Indian trail connecting along the shore of Lake Erie, connecting Cleveland to Buffalo. Then when Cleveland became settled in the late 1700s, early 1800s, this became the stagecoach path. At the end of the 1800s, at the turn of the century, this is where it was called Millionaire's Row. It's the most beautiful city or beautiful street in the country, well regarded as that. Had residents like John D. Rockefeller, many millionaires at that time in our history. Beautiful street. It had early public transportation, and actually this public transportation proves my point again. At the turn of the century with the trolley cars, when the trolley cars extended from downtown out to University Circle, that's what spurred development in University Circle. Case Western Reserve University moved to University Circle then from Hudson, Ohio, and residential took off. So that was the first stage of transit-oriented development. I grew up in Shaker Heights. My front yard was the light rail on Shaker Boulevard. I lived on Shaker Boulevard. So I grew up getting a dime off my counter and taking the rapid to school every day and back. It's not. I don't think it's a dime anymore, Joe, is it? I believe in it. Today I live on Shaker Boulevard and I still take the rapid whenever I can. So Cleveland has a great long history. But my building, the history of my building started in 1910. In 1910, Cleveland was the largest manufacturer of cars in the world, bigger than Detroit. It had more automotive innovation. Lots and lots of car companies were developed there. One of them was Baker Electric Automobile. They were the largest manufacturer of electric cars in the world. And at that point, electric cars were a great solution, better than the internal combustion engine. So Baker would need it, at this point they've been in business about 15, 20 years. They needed to have a showroom. So they thought, what better place to put the showroom where all the millionaires are? So this is a 1915 car, about the time that my building was built in 1910. And that was one of the first commercial buildings on Euclid Avenue. This is a building, it was designed by a noted Cleveland architect to have a little bit of a residential character, beautiful sort of arts and crafts style. This is the building when I first looked at it. When I sold my partnership to my architectural partners and decided to do real estate, I wanted to do small scale development, small scale tenants for these startup tech companies. We have a lot of R&D space in Cleveland, from the Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital, Glidden, Sherwin-Williams, a lot of great R&D, but it's all big institutions. The small startups didn't have home for their laboratories. So I thought this would be a beautiful building. I like the building, but I looked at it, and as you can see, it's a little bit in shadow. Big pavement of Euclid Avenue in distress. The utilities underground were in bad shape. No street trees, no amenities. It was not very impressive. And the back of the building, my wife refers to as Stalag 17. You know, it's got that nice homey feel with the barbed wire and closed up. And the reason that is in 1960, about 4 blocks from this building, we had the Huff race riots. And the area suffered, in Midtown, suffered huge disinvestment. That combined with the heavy unionization in Cleveland, a lot of our companies moved down here to the south. So there was a void between University Circle and downtown. So Midtown had become sort of a wasteland. When I looked at this building in 2002, it was empty, had been empty for a couple years. And I looked at it and I said, you know, everybody's talked about this dual hub corridor, what would become the BRT. I don't believe it's happening. There wasn't any movement. So I said, no, I'm not going to invest in this building at this time. I like the building. It's in the wrong location. So I bought a building out in the suburbs. That was 2002. 2006, I came back and the street was under renovation. The BRT was being constructed. Cleveland Clinic, which is a neighbor, this is East 71st Street. They're up at East 89th Street. They were expanding westward towards this. So the dynamics had totally changed. But the reason for the change is the investment that RTA and the city put into the Euclid Avenue. So I said, yes, now it is time to make the investment. So I bought the building at the same price it was offered 4 years prior to that. So I'm really the but-for case. But for the investment in Euclid Avenue, I would not have made this investment. So I took it on. In some of the previous shots, you can see that they had bricked up the windows, the storefront windows after the riots. And I reopened them. I cleaned up the building. It's a beautiful building with some beautiful neighbors. You can see the building to the right is now under construction, renovation, and it is that momentum is starting to carry. So this is the building now. It's not a great shot, but you can see the transit stop in front of the building, all the flowers that Joe plants, and they take care of it beautifully. That maintenance aspect was a huge portion of my decision as well, to know that not only are they going to build it, but they're going to maintain it. And the city had a reputation, as most big cities, that when the budgets get tight, you know, flowers are not on the high priority. So it was great to know that this is going to be maintained and taken care of. So, oops. Okay, so I'll try to keep you guys awake. This is the lobby. You might not be able to see, but it was renovated in the 60s with really great shag carpet, a drop ceiling. You can see on the left-hand side 2 windows that were big storefront windows that they had closed in and put in these tiny windows with prison bars. I mean, not a very inspiring place to work. And if you notice all the white walls, all the drywall, I had the contractor take out the ceilings, take out the shag carpet. They were taking out the walls, and what did we find? Wood paneling, oak paneling that was underneath that the previous owner who owned it since 1966 had no clue was there. So we cleaned it up. It's a beautiful building now. You can see the windows on the left are the storefront windows opened up. The ceiling, when we took it out, we found these transom windows above the storefront windows. It's a beautiful building. This is where the showroom, this was where the cars were on display for the showroom. But the real economic engine, the reason I bought it, was for these high-tech startup lab companies doing medical technology. And this is one of the companies, and I can go into more detail on the stories, but laboratory companies. This is a very high-tech lab, a biosafety level 1 and biosafety level 2 lab. But my favorite piece was Baker Electric Automobile. So what did we do? We put in a new charging station for electric cars. We were the first in Cleveland to have it. So we've got, on the left is the original 1915 version of the Baker Electric Automobile. On the right is a new plug-in hybrid. And so we've had people drive. Our first customer drove from Toledo with his father to Cleveland to charge up here and drive back just to prove he could, because his dad didn't believe him. So in essence, why is the health tech corridor working? It's working because we have strong anchors, downtown and University Circle, big employment bases, and a lot of people there. The strong employers, Cleveland Clinic with 40,000 employees, University Hospital probably with another 15,000, Case Western Reserve University, the Central Business District. There's a lot of employment there. There's also a growing residential population there, filling back in what used to be a very dense neighborhood in the 50s. Strong destinations. Not only are there people there are places to go there. The museums in University Circle, the Art Museum, Severance Hall where the orchestra plays, bars and restaurants downtown. So there's a lot of destinations that are just on this corridor. The health tech corridor, I'm using Joe uses the term the health line, which is the name of the BRT. There's a whole strategy, real estate strategy that has gone in based on that as a health tech corridor. And what we've become is a mixed-use linear research park. So as opposed to most university research parks, and going down to North Carolina to the research park there, in the 1950s you'd build a research building surrounded by parking. It'd have trees around it. Then you'd have another research building surrounded by parking, trees around it. And if anyone wanted to go to lunch outside of the building, they'd have to get in their car, drive 20 minutes to go somewhere. What the researchers, the young 20-year-old researchers, 25, 28-year-old researchers want is to walk out the door and be able to get to Starbucks, to walk out the door and be able to have dinner with their friends. They don't want to have to get in their car. So the being on the health line is really important to them. So these dots are probably too hard to see, but that's all the different investments. The biggest investor has been Cleveland Clinic and a lot of the institutions, but there are a lot of investors. After I made my investment, a suburban developer decided it was time for him to come in and start making an investment next to me. He's bought 3 buildings, fixed them up. There's a 4th building between us. So there's that whole gap of Midtown is filling in. So this is a shot, again, I just took a shot. It was raining the day I took it, so not a great shot, but from my transit station looking to the east towards Cleveland Clinic is at the end of the road, because the road turns so you see it. But on either side are new residential developments. One is a senior housing project, the other is affordable housing, and market rate housing is going in as well. This is a second project that I'm doing, which is, I filled up the building out in Independence in 2006. I filled up the building there at Midtown 2 years ago, and so now I'm ready for my next project, which is downtown shopping arcades. Cleveland has 3 historic shopping arcades from they're 100 years old. Beautiful, beautiful buildings. They're on the left. You can't quite see them, but they're right in front of the health tech corridor, right in front of the transit stop. And that is, again, I've now become a serial developer along the health tech line, so it's been great. This is one of the shopping arcades, big skylight over it, And we just took it over, so it's not as active as we hope it will be. This is the other one with the skylights over it. But I thought that this picture everybody would like. This is the second arcade, and this puts the cars where they should be, off the streets and in the arcade. So I love the 1950 model, not the car, but the actual model on the car. So hopefully we can have some fun with it. The last piece is, why did I invest? And there's a lot of investment. I'm small compared to a lot of the big institutions who put in millions and millions of dollars. My project was a 50,000 square foot building with about a $7 million investment. I bought it for $600,000. So to me, that's a big investment, but it's a lot of investors like me making those same decisions. What drives it are market factors. If I couldn't make a buck at the end of the day, I wouldn't have done it. So if you don't have the right economics, the BRT won't save the project. But with the right economics, the BRT starts setting where the right location is. That's number two. Real estate's all location driven. Without the BRT, we would have leaking water pipes, sewer pipes, overhead electric lines on Euclid Avenue the way we did 5 years ago. That was not appealing to me when I have high-tech companies who have to rely on power, have to rely on water and sewer. They wouldn't move in if they knew that every other month there was going to be a break in the water line and repair and shut down their services, because they're doing research projects and studies which go on for years, and if they have an interruption, there goes a year or two of research. So that was very important that the infrastructure was done, and just as important that the aesthetics were done. That when you look at my front door now, it's beautiful, and it's not because of what I did, it's because of what the investment on Euclid Avenue did. So it does matter, and it does help. The last are building specifics. My investment was based on a specific building that I got at a good price, was in the right location, and I could convert for the use. So I'll look forward to questions next, and want to introduce Russell Lamb, who's a great real estate advisor. He's a developer and a friend from Cleveland.
Well, good morning. Yes, my name is Russell Lamb. I'm a principal with Allegro Realty Advisors, and also a principal with Blue Water Capital Partners, which is our investment company. You'll probably realize here, if you haven't already, or in the next 45 seconds, that you're going to wonder in your head why, do people from Cleveland really talk this way? When I grew up in Mississippi, the only two Clevelands I knew of were in Mississippi and Tennessee. So you imagine my surprise when I agreed with my wife to move to Cleveland that there's one in Ohio. But I've been a proud resident of Ohio and of Cleveland for the last 14 years, and actually really proud to call it home and raising a family there. So this does feel like the Cleveland show today, so I'm going to skip through my presentation a little bit. This one's going forward. Look at that. Y'all have seen that about 10 times, so I'm going to get really granular about our project, which is at the Cleveland State University campus. And by the way, I'm sorry I lost my voice a little bit and developed a cough overnight, which has nothing to do with my behavior on Broadway, no matter what you hear. Our project is on the Cleveland State University campus. The campus, Cleveland State, historically had been really a commuter college, university where people can't come in for the day, take classes during the day, go home at night. That very few residents live on the campus. That has changed in the last 3 to 4 years, and you're going to see a lot of these things that have happened on Euclid is really because of Joe's project. That it has really been an amazing catalyst, and while many of these projects might have had their genesis before that, they really came to fruition because of the catalytic nature of Joe's project of creating this bus rapid transit on the Health Line. So Cleveland State, historically, it's about 7 blocks going east and west, and 4 blocks going north and south, 18,000 full-time students now. and a healthy and growing population of campus residents. And over the last 3 years, there has been a constant growth in the number of projects that are adding residential halls, both sponsored by the university and private development. Give you a sense of the college, so that's the Cleveland State campus. I'd like to talk to you about the College Town block, which is an area between East 18th and East 21st Street in Cleveland on Euclid. There were, 5 years ago, there were 8 buildings on that block. This is right before Joe's project. I'm not sure exactly what year you started construction. 7? 5. So right in that time, 8 buildings there, 5 were vacant. Today, there are 8 buildings there. 1 has gone away. 1 has been built in an infill, and they're all occupied and redeveloped. This is our project. Normal people would walk by that and pull their coat in a little bit and hurry past it. Developers look at that and say, wow, that's something special. And so we did that. We saw that building, and we were looking to relocate our company and to make an investment in downtown. I'll talk about some of the reasons behind that here in a moment. And so we acquired, that property was in distress with a loan that was non-performing. It had been vacant for at least 4 years. It has a pretty storied history. It was originally a auto dealership. This was Cleveland's original auto mile, so all the dealerships were in this section of downtown Cleveland. It had also been a billiards hall, a dance hall, a framing place, and its last, for a number of years, was a place called Morris Graphic Arts, which was a graphic arts design place and retail store. So building was built in the 30s. Actually, a number of events have occurred in the building. We've tried to piece this together, but during renovation, you can always see how the building was built previously. We believe it was a 3-story building at one point, because we do have beam pockets in some odd places in the building. There are also old windows that have been bricked in that are basically below floor level, so some odd things. There's burn marks from fire, so something happened where it was a 3-story building, it was rebuilt as a 2-story building, and then a 1-story addition was made to it in the 40s. This is just some more of the detail about the building. This is sort of classic poor development, single pane, aluminum storefront system. Most of the building, most of the terracotta was covered up with that really nice sign there. Transom windows, just like in Dick's building, we uncovered transom windows behind that sign. And you can see on the second floor, a very large open windows, single pane glass, huge pieces of glass with plywood above the windows. This is a sense of how the block was at the time of our acquisition. You can see Joe's project, the health line, is in now. You can see the streetscape a little bit. You can see the how the bus line moves, how the buses move to the center. So we are benefited because we have a stop right in front of our building, and it's much more vibrant. That's the back of the building, which had a, just looks pretty bad. This is the inside of the building. We could have filmed an episode of Hoarders in this building. It was just amazing what was in there. That's actually cleaned out initially. That's the basement, things in pretty bad shape. That's the first floor, and that is where our offices are today. Same kind of things that you find in older buildings, things that are covered up that are actually really nice features, but they were covered up for some reason in the past. Drop ceilings, just generally poor construction on the inside. This is our building today. Again, we restored all the original terracotta on the building, new storefront window systems that actually replicate pictures of the building from the 1960s that City Hall had. So same exact design that the building was structured. The lower storefront window systems, that is the original penetrations in the building. So that is all how the building looked when it was originally built. And if you look in the bottom right corner, you'll see the other developments that occurred. So when 5 years ago, that whole block was vacant except for one printing supply company that is still there. But everything to the left of our building in that picture is apartments. And as Joe had mentioned earlier, apartment occupancy downtown Cleveland is 95% or higher, and it's very, very tight. This is all college student. It's private, but it's college students primarily occupying those buildings. Now to the, let's see if I have a better picture. There we go. Now, when we acquired our building, there was our building was vacant. The building to our immediate right, when you're looking at the building from the street, was also vacant. And we worked collaboratively with the university to have them tear that building down. It was in really bad shape, and create a pocket park. Because part of this urban development, when we're trying to bring mixed uses, residential and retail, is to bring some green space. And the university has been a great partner in identifying how they can improve the overall aesthetics of the college town and create other amenities for students and office workers. So this is to the side of our building. Of course, when the university tore down the building to the right, we were certainly hopeful that we would have a really beautiful facade, and that was the case for about the first 30 feet, and then it was pretty bad shape, so we had to adjust our design to come up with something to cover the masonry there, because it was in really bad shape. And these are just some pictures, the after pictures of the interior. There's our basement. We do have the benefit of a basement because we can really move all of our infrastructure for the retail tenants through that. We have restaurants that are college-oriented restaurants that are both facing the street with patios on the side. So one of the innovations actually in Cleveland, since I've been there, when we first moved, no one ate outside. It was really fascinating because it's beautiful summers in Cleveland. That has really changed, and that is almost a primary criteria for restaurateurs is they want outside dining. So we have that with the collaboration with the university, and we moved our company to the second floor like good developers go occupy your buildings. And so we've moved our folks there as well. Just want to say for a moment a couple of things. Reclaiming your urban infrastructure requires a couple of things. One, it requires a combination of pioneers and settlers. I view Dick as a pioneer. We're definitely the settler. He was there first. He sort of proved the notion that this can work, but you have to have both. So we sort of came in and populated behind Dick, even though we're at different parts of the health line. It really gets the momentum going for reclaiming the urban infrastructure. And if you think about it, certainly in Cleveland, and I'm assuming the same thing in your case, what we're really doing is we're stringing a necklace. And so we're one of the pearls in this necklace. This College Town block, 18th to 21st, is just one of the pearls. And if you look at what's happened in the last 5 years, we've gone from a block that was majority vacant to a block that has had an enormous amount of reinvestment in it and is fully occupied. Every building on our strip except for one, between 18th and 21st has been redeveloped. So we're slowly stringing this necklace together, and it needs a combination of pioneers who start it and the settlers who can come behind it and finish it. So what made this possible for us? And there are really four things that really got us interested in this project. The first is the place setting, and it is without a doubt the fact that the transit infrastructure that came to this part of town completely changed the context in which we would develop. The streets changed, the streetscape changed, the traffic flow changed, the attitude changed, and it really became a very comfortable place for people to walk around, for people to enjoy the outdoors, the infrastructure, the architecture, and being in that part of town. The second is we had a great collaboration with the university. We had a shared vision, and that's important. And we had a very good, positive collaboration with the university because as they were creating, their success is also tied to what happens on their front door and their back door and on the sides. So that was a great collaboration with them. Third is we had financial incentives from the city. The city of Cleveland had a program, I think it's still going on, which was called their Vacant Properties Initiative. And it was grant money, it was money available, it was loan money actually available from the city that had a grant component, a forgivable piece of the loan. And so if you took a building and it was vacant and you were able to populate it, redevelop it, and put jobs in it, then they had a financial incentive that made the development work better. And lastly, for our company, and I think Brian spoke to this as well, for us to attract and retain the kind of talent that we want, that talent wants to be in urban areas. They want to be in vibrant areas. They want to be where they can take transit, where they can walk to work. They can go right after work and go get a drink somewhere that's close by. And we've really viewed that the future of our company was going to be heavily influenced by where our company was located, and that needed to be in an urban context. And so those four things were really the elements that made our project interesting to us, necessary to us, and successful for us. Thank you.
For all you Nashvillians, if you don't think the college component is important, I heard at a seminar the other day that there are 117,000 college students in a Nashville MSA. 17,000 a year are graduating, and Nashville is retaining 60% of those. It's overwhelming statistics of educated kids. That's phenomenal numbers.
Good morning. I'm going to try to go kind of quickly so we leave some time for questions and answers. I'll encourage you to start thinking about what those are. I'm going to condense my comments here since we're a little late on time. Maybe just as a start, though, I'm a real estate developer from Minneapolis. How many real estate developers or investors are in the room today? Okay. That's a fairly common thing as we get together and talk about transit, that the transit folks are out ahead of the real estate people in general in terms of thinking about this stuff. Another little thing we do in these deals, maybe Jeff Anderson did it yesterday. If he did, I'm sorry. How many of you walked to work when you were kids? Walked to school when you were kids, excuse me. Okay. And how many of your kids walk to school now? So again, we just sort of see a little measurement of some of those shifts. One of the interesting things to me about the previous comments that we've heard from folks, and I'm just going to elaborate on some of them, is there is a huge shift going on. It's dramatic that those of us in my age group are pretty much in the old world still. Talk a lot about this stuff, don't really act on it. But it's dramatically different with the 18 to 34-year-olds as we've seen. And that's something that's hard to understand because us older people talk about, well, we don't really want this stuff and so forth. The younger people think very, very differently about it. So when we talk about the real estate market, very, very important to talk about which real estate market, where are we talking about, in, out, young, old, city, suburb. It's not homogeneous in any way, and yet it's a very exciting time. I always, kind of include the good news, bad news. There's a lot of good news about the trends and things that are moving this in a new direction, and there's a lot of significant challenges yet, and so we're just getting started. Gary talked about the importance of design and vision, critical in these areas to have good master plans that secure development. When you're going into a new area where there has been disinvestment, the first guy, the pioneer, wants to have some sense that there's a vision for this area. When we were building condominiums in 12 blocks of parking lots, it was important for us to have a master plan that demonstrated the park that was there and the other things that were going to happen. When you look out of the sales center and see nothing but parking lots, you need something to sell. Political leadership, Joe and Rich talked about how critical that is. Sounds really encouraging here in Nashville. I'm depressed in Minneapolis. We don't have it. And so it's critical to make this stuff happen. Also was mentioned of business leadership, just as important. And so in Cleveland, it sounds like both the political leaders and the business leaders got on board to help make this stuff happen. The real estate market is driven by investment, driven by business, and it really is completely linked to the culture. And one of the issues in our culture was we see such different things is those sort of over 40 are really not all that interested in it from a market point of view. In a good intellectual college town conversation, they're all about smart growth, but ask them where they live and where they shop and how they move around, and it's not this new generation. So we really have quite a divide between those two. We talked about affordable housing, a great presentation, some very dense stuff there. I hope you have a copy of that for you folks to take home, because there's a lot of great work that was done there. But I'm thinking about affordable housing at more of the 30,000 foot level. We found out now, after generations of driving so much, that our cars and our transportation are costing almost as much as our housing. CNT out of Chicago published a study that showed that the most affordable housing was at the edge. That's what we always knew for the last 25 years, drive till you qualify. They turned that on its head by just adding household transportation costs in there to find out that the most affordable housing is right here in town. So our whole notion of where is affordable housing missed the notion of you have to move around from your housing, and when you add those two things in, as everybody needs to do, it's a completely different story. And so that's an important thing to understand just at the larger level. There were some comments about affordable housing. One of the frustrations for me is we come in and reform the world and we remake our cities and take on all these tough challenges. We have to solve all of society's problems at the same time. So transit lines tend to get way more attention about affordable housing, rightly so, than we can just go out and build anywhere in the suburbs not having to talk about it. So we put a lot of pressure on our transit lines to solve all these problems. That's a good idea, but it's challenging. And rarely in Minneapolis, people say, are you going to build some affordable housing? I say, you could buy any house, a single family house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, near our one line, less expensively than I can build a studio apartment. So affordable housing in most of our communities isn't coming from developers building brand new units in 2012 dollars, 4 floors up on an elevator, when most of our affordable housing demand is for families. So I think we really want to look primarily to the existing inventories that are near transit lines, so we get people off of their transportation costs and take advantage of the way below replacement costs that most of our real estate trades in those areas. So this notion that it should be done in new construction is very misplaced in my opinion. Development, does transit drive development? Yes, maybe, and no, depending on where you are. I think in Minneapolis, we have one line connects the Mall of America and the airport to downtown, 2 great generators. Nothing is happening in between. There's no land. We made beautiful plans. We didn't zone it. The NIMBYs control the development along most of our transit lines. In Minneapolis, they've let nothing happen there, and our political leadership has not taken them on. That's true. I was visiting Harriet Troning in Washington, D.C. She's the head of planning in Washington, D.C. She said, I look across a parking lot at the transit station from where we live. So even the head of planning can't get it done sometimes, even in one of the most progressive markets in the country. So NIMBY remains to be a huge challenge. I live in South Minneapolis. It's a very liberal place. You couldn't find somebody that didn't describe themselves as a smart growther, but somehow they never show up when I'm proposing a project. And we routinely get just turned away. Recently, we proposed a project on a transit line with 1-to-1 parking, and they were 500 square foot units, so most of them are going to be occupied by one person. We provided a car. So we provided, a parking space, a 200 square foot parking space for a 500 square foot unit. The parking space costs $25,000 to build. And the neighborhood said, you don't have enough parking here, we're not going to let you build this project. So that was twice as much parking as we probably should have provided, created great economic disincentives. There's a lot of problems sort of getting it done when you get down on the ground in this stuff. Some of the other issues, we saw some great slides, a beautiful public realm investment, parks and open spaces, plazas, beautiful streetscapes, absolutely critical to the private development. And so you see communities that understand that and make that investment. That absolutely does represent the public and business commitment. It isn't just a private investment. It is a great stage setter. And so really, really important. A lot of stuff to talk about. Public works departments. We draw all these fabulous plans that involve multimodal and a pedestrian environment and a bike environment. The public works departments across the country, I hope they're better here in Nashville, routinely destroy those plans. with the priority of the roads. Oh, there goes the bike lane, there goes the sidewalk, because the roads have to be 3 times as big, and that's not a pedestrian environment. So we've had a lot of beautiful master plans just shredded and never get anywhere near reality because of Public Works Department. So there's still an issue there. Our industry and development is single use. We know how to do housing or retail or office. We don't really know how to do those things. The lenders don't really know how to finance those things. Those are all changing because the private market will turn on a dime. When they see a market opportunity, they'll come up with a new financing project, or the developers will figure out how to do mixed use. Initially maybe by joint ventures. Now we're kind of getting better at that. The public often drags behind. So, that's something you've heard probably for years. Financing is difficult, mixed use is difficult. It still is, but it's changing rapidly as the market demonstrates. Because these stories about the market are really, really exciting. That 18 to 34-year-old demographic, 26% of them that don't have driver's licenses. I mean, I'm with Brian. I was there at 8 o'clock in the morning when I was 16 to get my driver's license. And it's just hard to understand that a quarter of the kids don't even have one. That's so different. That's going to affect how we plan. So these conversations we have right now are really kind of jumbled because there are 2 really valid messages. Nobody wants this stuff. We're addicted to our cars. We're going to keep on doing it the way we do it. The realtors will reinforce that. The sales will reinforce that. And yet over here there's a very, very compelling case being made more and more every year about the value of the urban market, the interest in it. And we're seeing new forms of urbanity, new exciting places that are clean, well supervised, well merchandised. It's a different kind of city living than we had in the past. So I was, I've heard lots of great stories about that in Washington, D.C. land that traded at $5 a foot, trades at $100 a foot 12 years later. We go along all these lines that have been successfully implemented, and more case studies and stories are being developed that support developers who are trying to change the attitude of lenders and other developers in the community. There's a lot of stuff to digest in all of this. I want to be sure we leave some time for questions, so I think I'll come up short. I did provide one. I didn't do a PowerPoint. I did provide one handout for you. There was just a little homework we did. In 2006, the market crashed. I didn't have much to do. I did survive it, which was nice, and began to do a lot of volunteer work on transportation issues. Met Brian, some others in Washington, have been there a lot, and just began to try to understand that relationship between development, land use, and transportation. In fact, I'm kind of a radical in the sense that I really, really believe that transit ought to follow land use. I asked a couple of people here earlier, where's development going in Nashville? That's where the transit should be going. So often in Minneapolis, we're planning a line that's convenient because there's a rail corridor available or something, or funding available, but there's no development demand going anywhere near it. And so we got to begin to think more about where's the market going. There's a favored corridor in most of our regions, and we should begin to link our transit investment with the market and where it's going. So, development-oriented transit, exactly, flipping that over. I can say, I really excited about my recent move to spend a lot of time in London to actually live this stuff, get rid of the car, and it's wonderful. And the real estate market there is $1,000 to $1,500 a square foot, and you don't get a parking space. Parking has been made illegal in the jurisdiction that I live. Touring a project recently, I said, hey, what's the parking arrangements here? This was just shortly after I'd gotten a phone call saying my transit-oriented project didn't have enough parking. Oh, well, we don't allow parking here. So $1 million, 1,000 square foot apartment selling in London overnight without any parking spaces. So we're a long ways from there in most of our regions here. Clearly the younger people are taking us there. The environmental and social and economic concerns are taking us there. We've heard all those. We got a long ways to go. I decided just to jump over the pond and live it in my last 20 years or so while we continue to work on making it better here. This TOD metrics thing was just going a quarter mile. We talk about a quarter mile walk from a station. Well, what can you fit in there? How much land is there? It's 5 million square feet of land. If you build it at a certain density, as I walk around here, you might see a lot of 0.5 or 0.25 FAR coverage. Well, how many units of housing, how many units of tax dollars does that generate? Going back to this idea that 125 years ago in Minneapolis and in Nashville and everywhere around the country, the real estate developers built these lines because they created so much value for them. And I'm part of a group that's working to bring that back in. When we looked at the cost share in Cleveland, it was 50% Met Transit and some other sources. Didn't see any real estate development dollars in there. Didn't see any of the private sector investment fueling that. we got to make that different in the future, and I think California is leading by actually insisting that zoning's in place, ready to do development, and then asking communities to commit some of those dollars to the funding of it. So today, typically our lines are being financed with $0. 100 years ago, 100% of the line, today 0. We're going to move that back up from 0 over time, but there's a lot of work to be done to do that. This was just a little illustration to help people understand the tremendous capacity to do that. If you take a typical line in Minneapolis, we're planning one now that has 17 stations. We did a little diagram that said if you did 10 smalls, a couple of mediums, and a couple of larges in terms of the density, you could pay for the entire line. We're a long ways from that, but just an illustration to take home and put up in your wall and help people understand the power of that from an economic point of view if the development's done right and in the right place. So, thank you.
Everybody grab today's Tennessean. There's a great op-ed piece by Randy Parham about the benefits of real estate development for a tax base up in Hendersonville. It's a pretty phenomenal article that just really hits home about what you were just speaking about. Questions? Yeah.
What can existing successful small businesses in economically disadvantaged areas, what can they do to attract developers to those areas? Our business is right next to a bus stop, so we're perfectly lined up for public transportation, but our area is kind of economically depressed. But we'd love to do something in the community to get more development in that area. So what would you suggest?
Anybody want to?
Well, again, I think that the notion that you might take some leadership in generating a larger vision or plan for that area so that other businesses you're trying to recruit understand that there is a bigger idea, try to get the public sector involved in improvements that might facilitate that, whether it's transit or green space and so forth. But again, to get the settlers, I think it was, instead of you're the pioneer, to get the settlers, a big vision would be a great help, I think.
And I think also, one of the key things is understanding what the market can be. So in our Midtown development, we knew the Cleveland Clinic was spinning off, and University Hospital and BioEnterprise were spinning off new businesses that were heading out to the suburbs. When they got out of the incubator, the business incubators at those three institutions, they'd go out to Beechwood, which is a suburb. They'd go to Westlake, but they weren't staying in the area. Well, the easiest thing is to be 4 blocks away from the mothership. So we saw a market that wasn't being met. So I don't know that, from your question, what that market is, whether it's people who want to commute, have an easy commute to downtown, what the amenities are, but that's what, you have to look at the market. That's what will drive the development. But you have to do it in a planned way and have a vision for it to get people excited about it and get people to make that investment.
And I would just say that the number one impediment to urban redevelopment is fractured land ownership. Yeah. And the way to do it now here is to start assembling the land now and get big blocks that are under ownership, whether it's MTA or whomever, and then you can do thoughtful development. It's much harder when you're negotiating with multiple people. It gets very expensive to assemble land in the urban context.
That's a really good entree. Our project that Ken spoke about in Brentwood, the city about 8 years ago put together what they dubbed the town center zoning, which allowed for mixed use development. And it was a very small central place in downtown Brentwood, and it was a lot of fractured ownership, and it was very difficult to assemble a decent block of land to do anything. It's just too expensive. So the city commissioners had the foresight to say, we've got to expand this boundary to include some big pieces of property, which enabled us to acquire 17 acres at the corner of Maryland Way and Franklin Road, which is obviously a very beautiful piece of real estate, but it gave us land mass to do what they envisioned when they put the town center zoning in 8 years ago. So they did exactly what you're talking about. They expanded the boundaries to allow for bigger, more quality development that could have all the different components, and it wasn't just these little fractured pieces of property.
One last thing, no other city has faced the challenge of kind of neighborhoods than Detroit. Start digging around all the stuff they're doing at the neighborhood level. It's extremely powerful and visionary, and they're engaged in the arts, and the folks your neighbors are coming together in Detroit, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. And so Detroit has still got a little ways to go before I think everyone passes judgment that it's back. but it's happening at the very local, micro level. Check in.
Yes, sir.
We are doing our bus rapid transit, as you know, and as we see that area redevelop, we're anticipating huge density increases. A lot of that being obviously housing, but also retail and restaurants. And although we've got the rapid transit there, we're a long way from London where you can't park, and most of the people that go to those businesses and offices drive there. What have you done in your neighborhoods to accommodate the needs for parking, and has that been put on the individual developers, or has it been public-private partnership?
That's an excellent question. The parking is really one of our biggest obstacles because it's so expensive to do structured parking. So again, the planning and foresight in a neighborhood, in a place, low-density place like Minneapolis and Nashville, if you can start the corridor development by parking behind in surface parking where you have relatively inexpensive parking, that's a tremendous advantage. If you can get out front, begin to think about the redevelopment in a district, informing district inventory, so not each building or each developer has to build that expensive parking, and that expensive parking is used 24 hours a day. You cannot afford to have $25,000 parking spaces sit vacant. So using them in a common pool by a variety of different uses, so you spread it across the day, is just essential. We were never going to make the transition of buying our new transportation system while we're also buying our old one at the same rate of 2 spaces per apartment and 5 per retail. We're going to need to begin to share that and wean off of it. We also do strategies where in the early phases we're building a large parking deck at 5-to-1 parking to meet the current market and see that wean off. The next project can survive on 4 and 3 and 2 as the transit takes hold, as the walkability takes hold. So there's a lot of different strategies, but phasing into it, starting with surface, going to common lots at probably more conventional ratios, which is discouraging and expensive, but with the hope that you could wean off of that over a period of time.
You know, it's interesting, and following up on Michael's point, TOD, there's nothing really more important than the parking in the equation, because it is so expensive. And so if he had parking maximums instead of minimums on some of his deals, you know, the neighbors couldn't kind of turn them down. So one of the things we did with the Atlanta BeltLine, which you absolutely have to do for your BRT line before you even build it, is go a quarter mile out on either side, upzone the heck out of it, you know, make parking maximums, not minimums. You got to create those things in place so you can share parking. Before I ran the Atlanta BeltLine, I had a development for something called Atlantic Station in Atlanta. We were able to share parking in a very significant way. We built 30% less parking. Well, we built that 30% in that case is 2,000 spaces less. Do the math, at 2,000 less spaces at $25,000 a space. It's a huge savings. The other thing too is TIFs, parking is infrastructure. I mean, in reality, in terms of thriving downtown marketplaces, parking is infrastructure. And many times, TIFs have provisions that, well, it has to be public parking, the public has to own it. You got to figure out a way around that too. And you know, so you don't want to just make it a gift to the developer and, you know, he cashes out. But so much of the parking you can't generate necessarily direct revenue on. It's fundamentally infrastructure. So maybe it's shared or what have you. You got to figure out a way around that as well.
And 2 examples from Cleveland. One is downtown. We had a district that had been urban renewal in the 60s that was starting to hit some vacancies because some of the bigger employers were moving to different parts of downtown. And one of the things that was key is parking. And what we wanted to do was figure out a way to not, typically in Cleveland, the CEO and the top management, they'll find parking spaces and they'll get those in their lease accommodation. But where does the secretary, where do the mid-level people park affordably? And that was an issue. So what Joe did at the request of the business community is connect 2 cheap parking lots, one north by the lakefront that was used basically for Cleveland Browns football games, and a little bit during the day that was at a rail stop, and one south with a free connector. He extended the connectors that he had free connectors downtown. You ride with a smile, and it's a great system. And to be honest with you, I think the bigger issue from the developers was that you had that as an answer to the tenants that you were trying to attract. Whether or not the people used it, it gave an answer. And I think they will use it. The connectors are being well used. But that gives an answer to a question that when you're competing with the suburbs, they have the free surface parking. How do you compete? That gave us an answer. The other solution is what Cleveland Clinic's doing, and all the big institutions in University Circle is to try to solve the problem at its core, which is they're investing in any employee that works for those institutions that buys within that neighborhood, buys a house within that neighborhood, they help pay some large percentage of the down payment. So they're incentivizing their workers to live close to work, which will improve their employees' satisfaction in many, many ways. It will improve the neighborhood around the institutions. There, instead of dealing with the symptom, you're dealing with the problem. And that incentive was really had great foresight and is working.
Last question. One Jim, I think I'm correct to say that Vanderbilt University here in Nashville provides 100% MTA fares for all their employees at every level. Is that correct? And graduate students. Yeah, they saw the cost of that structured parking, right?
Yeah.
And the lack of land. I mean, it was just an inventory of land problem, and they had other needs for their land with new buildings and stuff. That's
giving them a card, by us giving the students and the employees a card that they can swipe to ride MTA, and subsidize the train. That's really promoted that, helps us out with building less parking, but it really does help to support the system.
and a school the size of Vanderbilt with how many employees, Cyril?
22,000.
Yeah, when you've got a multiple of 22,000, it's a game changer. Just like if Walmart would decide to not use plastic bags. Whole Foods did it, and they have 400 stores. Walmart's got 10,000. So do the multiple or do the math. It's a game changer when Vanderbilt makes moves like that.
The building we're in used to have a different logo at the top, and they were big in Atlanta, Bell South, and they recognized that it's very expensive to build expensive parking on expensive land in the downtown, midtown areas in Atlanta. So they actually secured land at the edge. We have a heavy rail system. And at the terminal points, they secured land, built parking garages, and said, we'll give you a space there. It cut their costs hugely. It was really visionary.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.